Welcome to LBD Live Podcast for the 28th of August 2025. Tonight we discuss the LAWS GGE and what we can expect from the second session.
Welcome and thank you for joining us for the Lawful by Design podcast, Conversations Shaping Responsible Military Innovation. My name's Damien Copeland. I'm the Director of Article 36 Legal, an Australian-based international law practice specialising in the legal review of new weapons. Our aim is to bridge the gap between industry innovation and national legal review processes. The Lawful by Design Live Podcast is part of a Lawful by Design initiative which promotes IHL compliance as part of responsible national military innovation. So this podcast is designed to be interactive. We encourage participants to ask questions at the end via the chat. We'll aim for about 40 minutes of panel discussion, and then hopefully that will give us 20 minutes for discussion. Now, this podcast is being recorded and will be loaded onto the Article 36 Legal YouTube channel tonight, by the end of today or tomorrow. So let's get into it. Let me welcome our expert panel. Firstly, Tabitha Bonney. Tabitha is a senior legal advisor with the UK Government Legal Department, and she specialises in international law, including operational and ethical use of emerging technologies and artificial intelligence. She leads in disarmament, protection of civilians and conventional weapons, and has been a member of the UK delegation to the Convention on certain conventional weapons for some years. Tabitha is speaking tonight in her personal capacity, and her comments do not reflect those of the UK government or the Ministry of Defence. Next, we have Mr. Richard Lennane. Richard serves as a disarmament advisor to the ICRC in the ICRC's Arms and Conduct of Hostilities Unit. He has long experience in multilateral disarmament and arms control as an Australian diplomat, as a United Nations official, has previously served as the Chief of Biological Weapons Convention Implementation Support Unit at the UN, and had a number of senior roles within the Australian Government Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Next, but no means least, we have Dr. Neil Renic. Neil's a lecturer in military ethics at the University of New South Wales and a fellow at the Centre for Military Studies at the University of Copenhagen. His research focuses on the changing character of war, the ethics of killing, and emerging military technologies. He's the author of Asymmetric Killing, Risk Avoidance, Just War, and the Warrior Ethos, and is a member of the International Committee for Robot Arms Control. Thank you all so much for joining us tonight. I'm very much looking forward to our conversation around what we can expect from the LAWS GGE second session, which is due to commence next week in Geneva. So let's get straight into it. The international debate on lethal autonomous weapon systems is at a critical juncture. With the UN group of governmental experts meeting next week, states are facing mounting pressure to decide whether existing law, international law, is enough, or whether new rules are needed to govern the use of autonomous weapon systems in warfare. So tonight our expert panel will unpack these issues, explore what's at stake, and share their perspectives on where the debate may lead. Let's go to our first question. The question is, what is the current position of the LAWS GGE debate leading into the second session? Tabitha.
Thank you, Damien. So I think just to position what we mean by being in the second session in relation to this particular mandate, we have a mandate from the end of 2003 that set out the requirement of the group to set out a set of measures, regardless of its character, in relation to lethal autonomous weapon systems. And then the chair has quite quickly produced some text. And coming into the second session of 2025, we have actually something I would say is quite a remarkable feat. It's bringing together the concepts on the page that is starting to inform the debate among the group of government experts. So this is a debate, I would say, obviously many people are aware has been going on for some time. If you look at where the group was in 2023 in order to get the mandate that we currently have, there was still some very fundamental questions, and it felt difficult to see how those people, those states and organisations in the room would be coalescing around consensus. And what this text has been really good to do is to cut through some of those ideological positions and demonstrate that the possibility of a set of measures. Therefore, we have something to frame the conversation. It has informed the debate. It has made sure that national positions, which might have been based on ideological principles either way, have started to hone in on really getting the detail of an understanding of what it would mean and how the law needs to regulate these sorts of instruments. We're in the second session of 2025. Officially, we have until the 7th review conference to present a report to, so the mandate does run until next year, but the objective is to get something meaningful out by the end of this year. So this is a critical time, really, is to see how this text now lands. It has developed a lot, but honing in on those critical issues. So we've made some really good progress. That progress is very much attributable to the current chair, but effectively it's the rubber will hit the road this week because it will hone in on what is fundamental and what can be dealt with through negotiation.
Thanks, Tabitha. I agree. Ambassador Indenbosch and his team have done an excellent job with their rolling text. Richard, from the ICRC's perspective, where do you see the current position?
Well, this is maybe going to be a bit of a boring discussion because I actually agree pretty much completely with what Tabitha just said. We're also very pleased and, in fact, almost pleasantly surprised with the way the work has gone over the past year or so. The Dutch chair, Ambassador Indenbosch, done a really remarkable job in producing the text. I mean, I'll talk in a minute about the content of that text, but just the fact of being able, as Tabitha said, it's been a very fraught kind of history to this thing. It's been going for years. Getting the current mandate was difficult. And in this environment where there's all kinds of procedural problems and bad feeling and general unhappiness, the chair managed to sort of prepare this text and put it before the high contracting parties with nobody kind of objecting to this move. Like, I was quite surprised that some delegations say, well, no, we're not ready to talk about the text, that's a bit premature. No, we need to keep discussing this or that, or the read principles or whatever. But no, I mean, procedurally, this went very smoothly. Everyone got straight into working on the text. And as Tabitha said, I mean, this has really proved to be extremely helpful in focusing the discussion on what actually is at stake and what matters, instead of these kind of very sort of vague or abstract or ideological debates about what we should do and what matters and what should be prohibited and what shouldn't. Now, really, this talking about the text and looking at this in black and white. And one advantage of this text is it is very concise. It's only 3 or 4 pages. And so there's nowhere to hide, right? If you're a delegation and you're going to comment on paragraph 2, I mean, it's there. It's 3 lines. You can't fudge it. I mean, you can say, yeah, we like this, or we don't agree with that, but this word's wrong, this word's good. So it's really forced everyone, UK, ICRC, everyone who's been commenting on the text to kind of put the cards on the table a bit and say, okay, no, that's not what we wanted, or yes, we really like the way you've described that. That's exactly what we had in mind. Or no, we can't agree to that. So, but what about this alternative formulation? So it's really changed the whole tenor of the debate and the meetings, and it's focusing on much more on specific ideas about how you could regulate autonomous weapon systems, what this kind of restriction would mean, or how would you describe what an autonomous weapon is, and very much just much more practical. And it doesn't mean, of course, that anyone's agreeing on anything. There's a wide range of opinions. As Tabitha said, the rubber's going to hit the road next week, and we'll see just how close to agreement this text is or isn't. But if you look at what's in there, and you look at what the mandate asks us to do, which is to prepare a set of elements for possible inclusion in a possible instrument. I mean, it's all very vaguely defined, but that's what we've got now. Here is a set of elements, and we're down to sort of squabbling over, well, how to exactly describe this element or that element. But there's much less of this sort of big disagreements about what we're trying to do or what elements should be there at all. Nobody's really kind of asking for wholesale deletions of big chunks of text. So I think we're at a very promising phase. Of course, it can still go horribly wrong, as these things do, but I'm really quite cautiously optimistic that we're moving forward, and we've got a pretty good product to work with.
Thanks, Richard. And I think the ICRC have done a wonderful job of contributing to the discussion debate to date. My sense is that my hope is, in terms of first session normally has a certain amount of buoyancy. Hopefully that continues into the second session. Neil, from your perspective, where do you see us as sitting right now ahead of next week?
Yeah, hello, Damien, and everyone else. I really appreciate the invitation to chat. My serious worry is that we're all going to excessively agree, and that's going to make for a very dull conversation. So I'm going to do the best I can to be the skunk at the party.
Thank you.
So I should clarify at the outset that it's been a while since I've actually attended the GGE debate in Geneva. So I'm very grateful for the two other guests here who can speak more to the procedural details of the GGE and the CCW, where it stands right now and where it's likely to go. But I do think, kind of zooming out in terms of autonomous weapons themselves, I think you can regard the current legal debate at the UN extremely pessimistically, or with a kind of cautious optimism, maybe a very cautious optimism. I think to air out the pessimistic take on this, you could look at the GGE debate on autonomous weapons and argue that it's failed its most important tasks, given how long it's been going for. It's failed to stop or even slow the design and use of a broad cluster of AI-assisted technologies, including highly controversial technologies in Israel and elsewhere. A pessimist might despair over the lack of a prohibition on the use of autonomous anti-personnel weapon systems in particular, or even the hope of an eventual prohibition. But that said, I'm actually sort of trying to be more optimistic in life for sanity reasons. So I do veer more towards the cautious optimistic side of things. I think the more cautiously optimistic take would be something like the GGE debate was always going to struggle to meet its maximalist aims, to meet the aims of some of the more robust campaigner organizations, given the growing popularity and perception of indispensability with autonomous weapons among larger and more powerful states and militaries. But the GGE debate, including the more recent debates, has nevertheless served quite an important function. I think Tabitha mentioned some of these. It's given a platform for individuals and organizations to illuminate the risks and potential hazards and potential unjust harms associated with this technology, especially if it's left to sort of emerge unregulated. It's brought sort of important definitional clarity to the technologies themselves, but also a number of important ethical and legal concepts. It's given us, hopefully, a set of basic measures to control autonomous weapons in some important military domains. And I think also it's established an important moral and legal scaffold. I think sometimes people talk about regulation as a kind of single effort. We either get everything we want or it's a total failure. And I think actually looking at sort of the regulation of weapons historically, it's a process, right? Sometimes a decades-long process. And that's why I think some of the stuff we're seeing right now, even if it falls short of the expectations of campaigners and those who are incredibly critical of autonomous weapons, none of this stuff goes away. It's kind of building blocks, a moral and legal trellis for future regulation, hopefully. And that's kind of my more cautious, optimistic take. Some very real, important, good stuff has come out of the GGE process, but also this is a kind of rung on the ladder to hopefully putting together even more comprehensive controls for autonomous weapons in the future.
Thanks, Neil. I think you're absolutely right. And I'm happy to be corrected, but I think one of the things that we've seen over the course of the debate, as long as it's been, is that it has in some respects mainstreamed discussion around issues beyond the law. So the ethics, the morals that are relevant to, the whole discussion around use of technology in warfare. I think it has really been something that the CCW has achieved. So that being where we are now, with the rolling text as it stands, there has been a number of issues that have been more central, more of a focal point of the debate. So when we head into the second session, what do we see as the key issues that are going to consume the debate during the week? Richard, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, we could easily spend 2 or 3 hours on this, so I'll try and be brief. But I think what we expect is, let's say, there's some bigger picture issues like which revolve around not sort of particular formulations in the text, but more like the short, difficult words like should or shall or must. And so, what is actually being formulated as an obligation here, and what is kind of an option or something you could consider. So there's sure to be some debate about that, because we have some very interesting kind of restrictions set out in the text now, which are quite well developed and understandable. So it becomes quite a key point, like, well, are these like compulsory, or can you pick and choose? And obviously for different governments, they can have different views on that. Related to all that is the question of, well, what is the scope of the whole thing anyway? So the definition or characterization of an autonomous weapon. We've spent an awful lot of time on this already. It will no doubt continue. And the key issue there is this kind of phrase, what they call the key functions, that currently in the text is an autonomous weapon, something that selects and engages a target without human intervention. There's been a big debate about whether it should be identify, select, and engage, some other formulations as well. But this is a key point because it determines like what exactly is an autonomous weapon in terms of what this treaty or instrumental is going to cover, and so what the prohibitions and the restrictions apply to. So we'll no doubt see a lot of more discussion on that. I mean, the chair has come up with his current formulation based on already many iterations and arguments. He's prompted for a version that we at ICRC think is the best one, so we'll be out there championing that. But I think what is coming back to what we started with, things are looking somewhat promising, is that particular discussion has shifted from being more of a kind of abstract ideological thing to something much more specific. And at the session earlier this year in March, I think for the first time, it really made some progress in terms of, previously we'd been talking past each other. We're talking about identify, select, and engage a target. It became evident, people had very different meanings that they were thinking of, talking about identify, for example. Does identify mean think of the kinds of things you want to go to look for? Or does identify mean, like, for example, all enemy tanks in sector XYZ? Or does identify mean, oh, that's the tank, that's the one we're after? So, which we would call select. So, but we actually had some quite constructive discussions on, well, okay, we've been talking about different things here, so maybe we can agree to this formulation because we assumed that meant this, but actually it could mean that. I hope that this kind of discussion will continue, that we'll actually get some less ideological, political, and more sort of technical focus on what we mean by these terms. And the other big issue that we'll see coming up is this very kind of fundamental concept, which has blocked the whole discussion from the beginning, and that is of human control. So currently in the text, we have this formulation, which is context-appropriate human judgment and control. Again, this is the result of many arguments in many committees. The camel is there, but it's, I think now at a place where, again, you can have a bit more focused discussions, not because of the actual formulation, which, is still, I mean, personally, that's kind of like, well, what the hell does that mean? I mean, context appropriate. But I think the chair has done a very good job in not trying to sort of define this, what we mean by context appropriate human judgment control is, and then some paragraph saying what it means. He's actually sort of defined it operationally. We're saying we will achieve context appropriate human control and judgment through these measures, and lists the kind of, I'm simplifying, but that's basically the approach. Is you don't define this concept, but you actually set out how you would achieve what the concept stands for. So for us, that looks like a very good way to approach it. We'll see what the reactions of others are. But yeah, this is certainly a very knotty problem, and I don't expect it to be solved at this session or anytime soon.
Thanks, Richard. And I do note that the critical functions formulation that has continued to have currency within the debate was an ICRC initiative. So I think that's been well regarded. So Neil, next, what do you see as being the key issues that are still subject to debate?
Right. So yeah, regarding the kind of the legal nuances and those sort of easy to overlook but critically important questions of can versus may versus should.
Yeah.
I'm very appreciative that others spend as much time as they do on these questions, because they very quickly give me a nosebleed. Like I certainly recognize that the difference between a can and a should and a may is like, it matters a lot in terms of what this regulation is going to cover. But I'm glad there's some sort of hard at work legal practitioners losing sleep over it and not me. So maybe the approach I'll take is the more kind of ethicist one. Just as with previous sessions, a key issue for me in this second session is kind of what role ethics. This is primarily a legal debate, which is very understandable, but obviously ethical considerations can't be absent from this process. And the degree to which it's felt like ethics has been a source of frustration for me at times. So sort of to take that point that Richard raised towards the end, the kind of the eternal human control question, what do we mean by it? How do we know when it's there? How do we know when it's missing? The idea of meaningful human control, what we're now calling context appropriate human control and judgment, I think has been one of the critical issues across the kind of the years within the GGE. And I have a kind of permanent worry and an as yet not vanished worry about the potential for this kind of judgment to even exist within some of these systems. And I think I agree with Richard that it's been the degree to which we've moved away from like the realm of the theoretical and the realm of abstraction has been incredibly helpful. I think the more we can focus on actual weapon systems and actual technologies, especially technologies that are getting rolled out right now, that's the best use of our time. But I think even in some cases, there can be a tendency to look at autonomous weapons as just this thing in isolation, when in fact, what states are increasingly trying to do is have a kind of whole system of systems, autonomous weapon systems integrated into larger mosaics of interoperability and all the rest of it. And, you're also seeing this kind of growing fetishization of acceleration in warfare and in kill chains and everything. So I was quite fond of the term meaningful human control. I thought it kind of gave a lot of openings to have important ethical discussions. And my fear within the context of this kind of accelerated warfare, there's just going to be more and more places where meaningful human control, whatever we understand that to be, will just be suffocated. So I'm well aware that I'm veering outside the GGE format here, but I think, that's one of the things I've liked about the GGE, the degree to which the platform has allowed for some of these broader ethical discussions, because I think what's unmistakably true about this process is, even if the critics got all their dreams to come true within this context, a legal apparatus is not going to solve all of our problems here with autonomous weapons. There's going to be more broad and deep ethical questions that are going to endure regarding the use of military AI and the integration of autonomous weapon systems in future warfare, and what we should actually demand of those who fight war regarding meaningful human judgment and what that should look like.
Thanks, Neil. And I completely agree. From my sense, whilst it's well recognised that the law as it is intended to be technology agnostic, it doesn't answer all the questions. And so some of the unique characteristics of autonomy very much require interpretation of the law and understanding, and even creation of new law. So I think that the ethical component of the debate helps to inform both how we understand the law and how we recognise the need for more law. So Tabitha, human control, variously described, but most recently, I believe from the UK's initiative, context appropriate. Is that one of the issues you see as being central to the second session, or are there other things that you identify?
So yes. What I would say is that the structure of the current text that we have, I think, it gives away exactly how you would come at these issues from in a sort of a logical and methodical sense, and there is something of a tension. And just to pick up on a couple of the points that Neil was making, there's something of a tension as to this being the primary forum that some of these issues that have been up to, say, two and a half years ago discussed, where it's difficult to see how this forum, which is aiming at producing something that is legal, whether hard law or soft law in nature, but it's aiming to deliver something relatively concrete, and the ability to capture that sort of wider spectrum of concern about ethics in conflict, what that means under sort of emerging technologies, acceleration of the speed of conflict and the like. So now we have debates outside of the GGE, and we have some structured text that's looking at coming after some of these issues very specifically in regard to the mandate. We still have a little bit of an issue with how the groups in the room actually receive the message that just sits in the structure of the text. So I think the big issues that will come up are characterization. So Richard's already raised this sort of question of characterization. It's been really helpful that the chair provided a sort of an intersessional paper on some of these questions as to what identify and select means, to frame that a little better, to hopefully address this issue as to whether the states in the room, at least, we're talking past each other on these questions. But I don't know that is going to be entirely resolved in relation to characterization, because I think there are some other things that are informing that debate, including questions of how states in particular are seeing technology, and what we have here is ubiquitous technology and what they see as bleed across. So I think characterization will remain a repetitive issue next week. I think the structure of the text will be something that perhaps gets raised, because it will help understanding as to what the chair is trying to do by way of ordering the logic of the text and what the principles mean. So it's sort of the other side of that, the shall or must or will debate. It's a little bit of, if you have a logical design to this text, one thing leading to the other, that will help you understand what is something that falls out of the law, what is something that is a logical secondary norm, and what is something that is a restatement of particular principles, which is I'm afraid field for states and groups in the room to both agree but also to disagree. At the very heart of this debate, though, and when we come down to it, and this is something I think has actually developed really well this year in the first session, but will continue to develop over the second session, is what exactly has been the critical concern that has brought us all to the room. And I think Neil has expressed that very well in terms of what is it about these sorts of technologies, and that is just starting to develop across the room in terms of an understanding, and that is that what is the role of the human? Now, it sounds a little bit like I'm coming to the party very late, because lots of people will say, hang on, we were talking about meaningful human control 10 years ago. But actually, that the relationship between the current legal framework, the role of the human, and the role of these technologies with a level of informed debate is only just now being unpicked. And so I think that has to be critical. And it's probably somewhere I think that there can be a little bit of either structural or textual progress with this text, because we talk about the accountability of states and humans. That is part of this text. But when we're talking about the general principles, we jump between general principles of law and the concept of context appropriate human judgment and control. And it feels maybe like understanding the role of the human a little bit more within that logical leap will be the thing that I would suggest might help this progress between those logical principles.
Thanks, Tabitha. There's no easy answer. That's very clear. And you know, the debate has been trying to formulate at least an adjective that is widely accepted to describe what human control might be. My strong suspicion is that there's going to be some long, hard days in the second session. So those of you that are attending, I wish you well. So let's now move to our final question before we open to question and answers from the participants. And really, this is a bit of a crystal ball exercise. So what do you think the likely outcomes will be next week? And where do you see the debate being in 12 months' time? Neil, over to you.
Okay, so 12 months' time. I'll again leave it to the other two to speak more on the institutional workings of the GGE and where it's likely to be in 12 months. Again, though, I think you could probably have a quite pessimistic or a marginally less pessimistic outlook for 12 months' time. The pessimistic outlook, I think, would be states convinced that this is an indispensable tool of future warfare, go full steam ahead with integrating this stuff, including in quite reckless ways. You know, I think one thing that is important not to forget when we're talking about this legal debate that's been ongoing is that parallel to this, you have the private sector, you know, making a lot of incredibly overcharged promises about what this technology is likely to do going forward. And I think the worst case scenario would be that in 12 months' time, states have increasingly bought into this AI hype and just gone full steam ahead with developing, designing, and integrating this technology, including a bunch of technologies that are likely to kill people who shouldn't be killed. So that would be a very pessimistic take for how this will look. And it would, and alongside that would be a sense that the legal and moral debate is just failing to keep pace with this kind of increasingly accelerated technological rollout. But I think kind of the more optimistic take would be, you know, I think at times critics of autonomous weapons have ceded too much to some of the proponents. We've kind of ourselves have bought into the hype that these technologies are going to be some wondrous, albeit ethically problematic tool. And I think in a lot of cases, the technology is actually going to be kind of, shitty. Like sometimes we're dealing with quite janky tech that in actual fact not just generates legal and moral problems, but just falls profoundly short of the industry hype for what it's going to do on the battlefield. And I think ideally in 12 months' time, we'll actually have more empirical data on what this AI rollout is actually going to look like. And I think the more examples we find of this technology falling short of its military potential, the more opportunities there are to actually have more space to impose important ethical and legal limits on it. Because as long as states are convinced that autonomous weapons are some wondrous, magical silver bullet that are going to kind of cut the Gordian knot of future warfare, there's just going to be a hard limit on what they're willing to accept in terms of controls, I think. But if we can move to a space where we have a kind of more sober understanding of the opportunities, but also the limits of autonomous weapons, I think that will create space for states to accept controls on some of the more reckless uses of it. So that would be my more optimistic 12 months time in my new kind of optimistic outlook on life.
Tabitha, where do you sit between pessimism and optimism?
As I face what you've already suggested is might be some late nights next week. I don't think that I think that would entirely be the case leading into the second week next year as well. And part of the reason for that is because really it feels like we've been going at this for a long time, even under this current mandate. But if you hone down on it, we're coming into the 20 days over 2 years of talking about it, which is, to get work done among the number of states and very influential civil society actors that we have in that room, then it doesn't feel like a lot of time. So I sort of oscillate on the overall debate. I am more optimistic than Neil is, and the reason for that is because there are other things, and I think that's right that there are other places that should be informing accountability of states and informing restraint, responsible adoption, not just in relation to weapons. And we need to remember that it's quite important that we don't let weapons suck all the air in this space if what we're actually concerned about is the wider humanitarian and ethical regulation of conflict, because that is a bigger conversation. So I think that positively we are seeing First Committee looking at some of these questions. We've seen the Secretary General's report on these questions. We have the REAIM conferences that have been happening, and so those are all forums that I would expect to escalate in terms of providing some of that accountability. For the work that the group has to do, it's challenging, and I would like to hope that the not just the bones but the structure that we have here can be refined and preserved over these next 2 to 3 rounds of negotiations, so that we have some meaningful measures that then informs that debate and effectively makes it very clear that we ensure that these elements are a catalyst for the operation of the law, not the failure of the law, because we have these new technologies to tackle. So I see that in front of me at the moment, and I would hope, and the positivity I've seen from all of the states in the room, that the fundamentals of that can be preserved going into the next year.
Thanks, Tabitha. I think your aspiration for these discussions to be the catalyst for the operation of the law is wonderful. Richard, in the last few minutes before we go to question and answers, what are the ICRC's views on both the outcomes of next week and in 12 months' time?
Well, I mean, I found myself nodding, once again, nodding along with Tabitha's account of it, and it links back to something Neil said earlier about, this effort. It's not just a one-off; it's part of a process. Controlling these technologies is a process, and what we're doing in the CCW is just one aspect of that. In very sort of specific, concrete terms of what's going to happen in this process over the next year. Bluntly, we think probably not much. We'd agree with Tabitha that it's very important to preserve what's in the text now and the progress we've made. I think what would be very bad is to see that text now starting to be pulled apart and perhaps in some last-ditch attempt next year before the review conference to get consensus, wholesale deletions of paragraphs and whole concepts, and you end up with this very poor sort of shadow of what it once was, and probably then doesn't get adopted anyway. So that would be a shame. We, and I think quite a large number of states are anxious to prevent that, and they want to preserve all the good things that are in the text, both possibly to feed into a negotiation of an instrument in the CCW. That would be ideal. Failing that, if we have a good text, then the negotiation could be done somewhere else in the General Assembly or some other process, but fed from this very well developed and worked over sort of set of elements. And I think really from our point of view at ICRC, you could start a negotiation now, based on this rolling text. I mean, that's enough of a basis. It doesn't mean not everyone agrees on everything, but they're not going to agree on everything anyway. A lot of these issues are going to be relitigated in any sort of negotiation of an actual instrument. So, and questions about what exactly the scope of an autonomous weapon is, what the characterization, and then the sort of may, shall, should, could. These are questions for thrashing out and, what's going to be illegally binding and what's not. So, let's go. We can try and solve these problems over the next year, but I don't think we will, and they're only ultimately going to be solved, if at all, in a negotiation on a legally binding text. So that's how we see it sort of evolving over the next year. More broadly, though, I think, again, as Tabitha said, we have to look more and more at the connections sort of outside the CCW. This sort of dealing with autonomous weapons sort of specifically as a standalone kind of arms control disarmament or IHL issue, it's looking more and more odd because of all the developments in military AI more broadly, and the way, as Neil mentioned earlier, these systems are being integrated. It's not just one autonomous weapon, it's a set of autonomous weapons as part of a much wider network of interacting components, which several points at which artificial intelligence may be involved and separate systems working together. And if you think about that and then look at what we're talking about in the GGE, it's like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense just isolating this one bit of a system that's never going to be isolated in practice. And just to finish, a final point, Neil mentioned sort of the empirical effects of all this, what we're going to see in the battlefield, what we are seeing on the battlefield. I think this is very important. And this is something, as I've come into this job and working with the ICRC on this topic, it's something I've felt really kind of a bit of a handicap we've faced. There's all our efforts previously on other weapons, anti-personnel landmines, cluster bombs, nuclear weapons, biological and chemical weapons, being based on extremely solid and well-documented, hard evidence. What are the humanitarian impact of these weapons? How are they actually used in practice, as opposed to what militaries or manufacturers say they are. And that has guided all our work on that, and that's why we've had the good results we've had. With autonomous weapons, necessarily a lot of it is still speculative. We will see them being used more and more, and that in turn, I hope, will help us get more of a steer on what exactly we should do about it. There's a big appeal, of course, in trying to regulate a weapon system before it's widely in use, because that could be much more effective. And the example everyone uses there is the blinding laser weapons protocol in CCW. Great. But I think we've probably, and this is not an official ICRC position, I think we've probably missed the boat. And but that's okay. Most of the weapons regulation we do is on weapons that are very much widely in use and have existed for a long time. That's fine. We know how to do it. It's not easy, but it can be done, and we will have the benefit of some much more empirical data to show like what the concerns we're trying to deal with.
Thanks, Neil. And I think that point around the technology and how it has changed over the course of the debate, from hypothetical in terms of, during the informal meetings to actual capabilities now, but continuing to develop beyond just weapons and into a broader range of military applications and the use of AI. So I think that's a really good point. So thank you, Neil, Richard, and Tabitha, for that wonderful discussion. That leads us now to the point where those online have the opportunity to ask any questions via the chat. I've got a question sent in earlier, which we might start with, and this is to the panel. So John asks, do you think international law regulation of autonomous weapons is best dealt with via an IHL treaty mechanism, for example, a CCW, or as an arms control or disarmament treaty via a separate UN General Assembly or CD mandate? Who would like to start? Over to you, Richard.
Thanks. Yeah, that's a good question, but the answer for me is pretty simple. It doesn't matter. Really, and I've been sort of. Neil spoke earlier of a tree falling in the wilderness, I think, before we went online. But I've been shouting this for years. It doesn't matter. The forum doesn't matter. The form of the instrument doesn't matter. Soft law, hard law, okay, there are pros and cons, but in the end, you need to do something, and you need to get people actively involved in implementing that something. And that's a lot of what I've done in my career. For example, working in the implementation support unit of the Biological Weapons Convention. Yeah, you could try and improve that treaty, but there's an awful lot you can do in just implementing what's there and improving the way that operates. So in the end, I don't think it matters. You could do a protocol to the CCW, you could do a standalone instrument, you could frame it as a humanitarian IHL related treaty, or you could go sort of like a more traditional arms control and disarmament. What matters is what's in there, what the actual provisions are, and the amount of buy-in and engagement you have from states and governments and other stakeholders, and sort of what are they going to do with this? Are they acting good faith? They're going to try and make it work? Are they just kind of dragging their feet and doing as little as possible? I think that matters much more than the form and the forum and the shape of the actual instrument.
Thanks, Richard. And I recognise that you've got a meeting you've got to go to fairly soon. So in advance of that, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to the podcast today. Neil, Tabitha, anything to add to Richard's comments?
So if I might, I agree. I think that the issue really is what substance it covers and whether it covers the right substance. And that may well be informed by forum, because you obviously there's a suggestion that you don't want to bleed or dilute the core questions of the operation within, regulating of conflict and the interaction between the laws that we currently have. We see lots of disarmament instruments that work very well alongside the regulation of hostilities that we have in sort of CCW general law. So we can see interactions in terms of, say, Ottawa and amended Protocol 2, for example. So there is a possibility. So it becomes a conversation about the likely success of the debate. And what we have in CCW now is a group of built expertise that has come along quite well, and I think that helps the substance of what is concluded, rather than having something that is less focused. But if there was a forum that can accommodate the expertise and making sure that you come out with a substantive product. I think that there's lots of debate as to the difference between disarmament and pure IHL anyway, and what the continuum are. We're not talking about completely different disciplines here.
Thank you. All right, so I'm just looking at the chats and there's no further questions. So what I might do is wrap up and offer my very grateful thanks to our panelists for joining us, Tabitha, Richard and Neil. It's been a wonderful discussion. I've learned a great deal. I'm also very grateful that I'm not in your position. We're having to deal with this in the coming weeks, but those of you that are engaged in the debate, I wish you the very best. Let's see if our predictions come to fruition at the end of the first session and by the end of the conclusion of the current mandate. So thank you so much. So to conclude, the LBD Live podcast is scheduled every 2 weeks, Thursday at the same time. From my US friends, sincere apologies, but this is recorded, so you can watch this at a more sensible hour. If you have any questions or issues that you'd like to hear on the future podcast, by all means, send them in to us via the contacts on our website. The video of this podcast will be available via the Article 36 Legal YouTube channel in the next 24 hours. Our next podcast is actually going to be quite exciting on Thursday, the 11th of September, where we're hosting a Lawful by Design Ambassador Special. So we will get to meet not only Neil, but our other Lawful by Design academic ambassadors and hear from them in relation to their individual research and projects through the universities, but also in terms of the objectives that the ambassadors will seek to achieve in the next 12 months. We'll also be hearing about the Lawful by Design Student Ambassador Program, and in particular what those who have applied for the program can look forward to in terms of local, regional and global student ambassador events over the next 12 months. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again in 2 weeks' time.
Thanks so much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Cheers.